I don't actually remember owning any of the Secret Wars toys. I do remember owning the Superpowers toys. I was always much more of a DC kid than a Marvel kid. Doesn't mean I did not like Marvel. It just means that the DC heroes had already imprinted on my young, impressionable brain early in my life. But I do remember seeing the commercials for the Secret Wars toys and not realizing that there was a comic book series behind it. And I don't remember the first time I actually read Secret Wars, but now, years later, I still don't own any of the Secret Wars toys. But I do own the Secret Wars paperback, and I read it quite frequently. So there's something to be said for the printed word, I guess. Hello, and welcome to the Pop Culture Basement Podcast. My name is Mike Jamison, and with me tonight, and I'm going to mess this up, and I already told Mark that I'm going to mess this up, is first-time guest Mark DOMEIER. Did I say it right?
You got it right.
Yes.
Winner, winner. There we go.
Yes. And this coming from somebody who always has their last name misread, misspoken. I wanted to make sure I got it right, so there you go. I'm so happy that I got that right. Mark,
Yes.
How are you?
I'm fantastic. It's great to be here. I enjoy listening to your show, and we've touched base over the years a little bit, and excited to talk comic books tonight.
Yeah, and especially this is your first time on the show, so I always ask all of my first-time guests their pop culture origin, meaning growing up, how did you consume your pop culture? Was there a special place you went to consume your pop culture? What is your origin story pop culture wise?
You asked for it, you're going to get it.
All right.
Well, I think I'm about a year older than you are. I was born in 1973, and I look at 1979 as a big year for me. 6 years old, kindergarten, that kind of stuff. But two things happened that year. One was my mom would always take me to the public library in New Ulm, Minnesota, where I grew up, and she'd just leave us there because you could do that back in those days, and look through books and everything. But they also had a TV set up in one corner, and they were playing this movie almost every Saturday morning I was there. It turns out it was the original Star Wars movie. And I don't think I ever sat and watched the whole movie in one sitting, because then Mom would come back and pick us up. But I was so entranced by that movie and what it involved that I became a lifelong Star Wars fan and stood in line a year later to watch Empire Strikes Back. And also in 1979, my parents, for my birthday, got me a subscription to The Amazing Spider-Man. And so that was my first real introduction to comic books as well. And I fell in love with those as well. And all these years later, and 14,000 plus comic books later, and being a huge Star Wars fan as well, I look at that as kind of that seminal moment in my life. And they kept switching comic book subscriptions on me. So I had Spider-Man for a couple of years, then I had Captain America, and all of a sudden I'd leave in the middle of a storyline. I'm going, what is happening here? Wait a minute, I want to read these, because I didn't have a lot of disposable income. But all of my original ones from that time period, I still have them. Some don't have covers anymore, because I would lay on my bed in my bedroom and just read them and reread them, and you'd get like a year's worth, and I'd go back and read them all over again, all the way through. And that love of comics and all things related to it has never left me, as I'm sitting here at 52 years old and still get new comics every month, and buy old ones that I want to fill in a collection, and just have a blast all the time. I include them in my classroom. I teach middle school English. And in fact, I have some kids working on creating comic books right now for my class.
That's great. I was really lucky because my parents never stopped me from buying or reading comic books. They never thought it was something that was a waste. And I think they could see that I was learning things from comics, because I would say words or ask them what words meant that I read in a comic book. And I am a huge reader. I did an episode with my daughter about our shared love of reading. And I think it all started with reading comic books. And I was the same way as a kid in the late 70s, early 80s. I would get those Whitman 3-packs when I would go to we had a toy store in the Philadelphia area called Kitty City. So that's where we would go, and I would go down the Star Wars aisle and just look at all the Star Wars toys. But they also would have the Whitman 3 packs on the spinner rack, so I would get those. And my parents would, or my usually a grandparent, because that's what grandparents do. They buy you stuff. They would buy me, yeah, a Amigo or a Star Wars action figure, and they would buy me the Whitman 3 packs. So I'd go home and in the back of the car with no seatbelt on because it was the late 70s,
Right.
early 80s.
Yep. Yep.
I would sit back there and play with my Green Arrow Amigo and read my comic book. And
Yeah.
Mark is not lying. I can attest to his bona fides because I'm looking at him and I'm looking at the thousands and thousands of comic books that are lining his shelves behind him, and also the picture of Darth Vader that he has back there
Yeah.
too. So
My custom made shelves, I had somebody build those for me because I used to have some I had nailed into my own wall when we bought our house, and they were somewhat unsteady, but they held them. And we our basement flooded one year. Thank goodness my comics weren't in the long boxes on the floor anymore. That would have been a disaster. But I thought, it's time to have somebody put up something much better than my freshman year in high school shop class ever taught me. So, yeah. No, and you talk about learning vocabulary. Like if you read the 1960s Stan Lee scribed comics, you learn a lot of vocabulary words. And I've been a believer as a teacher all these years that for a lot of kids who struggle with reading, it's because they can't picture what's happening in the book. Their brain just doesn't quite work that way. So I have lots of collections of comic books on my shelves at school. And if you want to read one of those, like a essential Marvel collection, it's got like 20 comics in it. That's a book report book. Like that's a lot of reading to do. But if that helps you because you can see what's happening and you can start to make those connections, awesome. Maybe you'll discover a love of reading like I did, like you did, through that.
yeah, and it's a joke, but it's almost like fooling the kids into enjoying to read. You know,
Sure.
they see a comic book and say, "Oh, okay, well, it's just a comic book. I could read this comic." But that's why
Right.
books. You know, my kids are my son's 14 and my daughter's 11 now. But growing up, sure, I would buy them comics because I love them. But also like the Dog Man books and
Right.
books like that. As long as they're reading something, and that's
Yes.
how my parents always were too. As long as I went to 12 years of Catholic school. I've said this many a time on this
Same here.
podcast.
Same
12
here.
years of Catholic school, and because I like to read, by 5th grade, I was reading adult books. I was reading novels, and I was reading, I think, something by John Le Carre, one of those spy novels.
Hmm.
And we had a substitute teacher who took it away from me and said I was too young to be reading this stuff. And my mom, who was also a teacher, she was a kindergarten teacher, went to this sub and said, "Don't ever tell my son that he's not allowed to read."
Yep. Yep. No, it's a real thing, and like my mom read to me a lot when I was growing up too, but I think my teachers in school recognized and they really would differentiate. Like, these kids are good readers. I'm going to push them more. I'm going to have, you're going to read this book that might be fifth, sixth grade level and you're in third grade, but you can handle it. And why? Hey, it's fun to read something that's easy to read sometimes. I still do it. Like I'll read books for junior high kids every summer because I want to know what they're reading and what's good for them to read too. But then I'll sit down with a Stephen King novel. Although I do have one student who loves Stephen King right now in eighth grade. If you want to read it, go for it.
Yeah.
You know, more power to you.
Yeah, why tell a kid not to read something? Because that you just don't want to put them off. Let them read, let them discover what they're going to be into. There's so much, and reading Stephen King can bring you to another author who can bring you to another author. It's almost the same as music. I always talk about music with liking a certain band that brought me to another band that brings you to another band, and then
Hmm.
all of a sudden you have this whole branch of music that you like just from one thing. It's the same thing with reading, and I did get that from comic books, and like you said, with even with reading Stan Lee and his flowery prose from the 60s. um but you're exposed then to these type of words that you would never be exposed to, and you get into those comics, you get into certain comic writers, you get into certain artists, then you go to another comic and who might bring up another comic. You know, I went from just talking about those Whitman 3 packs to 10 to 15 years later reading a bunch of Vertigo comic books from
Sure.
DC
Oh yeah.
that that expanded my mind in ways I never thought. And we've come a long way from seduction of the innocent with people trying to stop children from. Now, has anybody ever complained to you or said to you, "I don't think my kid should be using comic books or should be reading comic books in school"?
No, I've never had that.
Okay.
Sometimes, again, depending whether it's a book or a comic, I had a kid one year that wanted to read a ghostwriter collection I had. And, I live in a small community and you kind of get to know people and families. I said, are your parents going to be okay with this? There's like demonic possession and stuff in here and a little bit conservative that way. Yeah, they'll be fine. Like, well, let me check on that. That kind of a thing. You get to know people a little bit. Like, I'm not sure that's in your wheelhouse, but the comic book part, no. And I tell kids and parents too, it's not just superheroes. There's a lot of great comic books out there that are not superhero based, and you can read those too and enjoy those, and should, because again, you talk about expanding and this leads to this, which leads to this, and Stephen King, to his son Joe Hill, who wrote Lock and Key, which is a fantastic series, but he also writes his own style of books, and it's similar but yet different than his dad's. All right, let's try this out. Let's and then again down the line. So this begets this if we take our Catholic school education from the Old Testament.
I want to eventually on this show cover Bone, just because
Oh, yes.
I want to reread it again. And I gave that to my son, I think when he was 7 or 8, and he loved it. And I'd also like to reread and then cover Concrete from Dark Horse Comics.
Okay. Bone I've read and loved and loved and loved. A Concrete I just have a passing
It's very, very
interest
good.
in.
It's
So,
very good. And it's very it's not what you would expect. I would highly
mhm.
recommend it. I'm gonna have to I need to find time to actually sit down and reread it again, and then yeah, I hope to cover that. But talking about our love of comic books, that leads us to our subject tonight. And I want to start out before we get into talking about everything around it. I just want to read a quote for the audience and for Mark to get us ready for what we're gonna cover. This is a quote from Carol Kalish, and she was Marvel Comics direct sales manager in the mid '80s. And the quote is this: "Let's be honest, Secret Wars was crap, right? But did it sell?"
And it
Yeah,
did.
and he did. It was
And
the,
it
the
did.
the biggest selling comic books in 25 years for
Yeah.
Marvel, and I think in the industry. But yes, we are covering tonight Secret Wars, and I'm starting out with that quote because it ties into a question I was asked a couple days ago by a friend of mine, actually a guest on this show, Tim Rooney. Hi, Tim. I had said to him that I was going to be recording this episode, and he said to me, "Oh, I've never read Secret Wars. Is it really what they say it is, and was it just a book that was put out there to sell toys?" And first I said, "You haven't read Secret Wars," because he's a big comic book fan, so I was surprised, and he hadn't. But I said to him, "Well, you have to listen to the episode because we'll talk about it." But yeah, Secret Wars. It's funny. Its reputation has changed over the years. I think in the immediate aftermath of its release in 1984, it was seen as just that, as a vehicle to sell toys, and it wasn't looked upon very highly. But now, I mean, 40 years later, it is I would say, one of the more seminal Marvel and comics crossovers, also because it's one of the first.
Hmm.
I mean, some people may say it's the first. I know Contest of Champions came out in the early '80s, and it did bring together a bunch of Marvel heroes and villains. But this was, I believe, and I'm sure somebody could tell me in the comments after this releases, or Mark, you could tell me, this was the first 12-issue miniseries that brought together not all of the heroes and villains, but a majority of the company's heroes and villains, and had a company-wide crossover that affected all of the Marvel universe.
Well, and that's just it, is that Contest of Champions is only 3 issues long. And while it had many more characters in it than Secret Wars did, it did impact other titles. Secret Wars, the month before, in all these titles, suddenly these characters were disappearing into this big structure out in Central Park or various other places. They were being sucked away. You're like, wait, what's happening? What's happening? Well, go read Secret Wars. And then it kept impacting titles for months to come. For instance, and it's not a spoiler because 40 years later, if you haven't read it, Spider-Man's black costume all of a sudden appears. You're like, wait, where did this come from? And you don't actually find out about it because it doesn't happen until issue 8, so it's another 8 months down the line. But it started doing that, so they had planned far enough ahead for some of these things. And then again, the repercussions, like when they come back, the references to Secret Wars continued. The Thing doesn't return to be part of the Fantastic Four, but in his own title, because he was a pretty big character at the time, this battle world thing is happening, and he's still there. You're going, I have to go read this because I want to know why and how and all this stuff. But it was a really meticulously planned out event, and as a result of that, Marvel said, wait a minute. Our sales tick up in these other series that these characters are in. We should do this every year. We should do something like this that we can get people to buy other titles, spend more of their money buying other titles they might not normally buy. And here in 2026, it still happens at least once a year, sometimes twice a year. You're going, oh, I need to go buy this issue of Wolverine I might not buy otherwise because it's a crossover with the Hulk or something like that. So, yeah, it struck a lot of chords and really had those repercussions, I guess, that have kind of still resonate throughout the Marvel Universe and all of comics. DC does the same thing. Other companies that have a shared universe will do the same thing as well.
Yeah, so the mid 80s and the two big world universe shattering events were Secret Wars and Crisis on Infinite Earths. And Crisis was announced way back in 1982. So I think a lot of people sometimes think that Crisis was a response to Secret Wars. I don't think it really was. And it was also done for a different reason, just because of DC's convoluted continuity that they'd built up over, at that time, almost 50 years of comics. They needed and were looking to streamline their comics continuity, and also wanted to streamline their characters and kind of reinvent their characters for the 80s. Superman, most notably, but I mean also Wonder Woman, Batman, a little bit. He didn't get changed that much, but yeah, Secret Wars and Crisis were the two big things that were happening in the 80s. These two big crossovers that I think were, for the first time, were really catching fans' attention and also people who weren't fans, and that's what they wanted. But for Secret Wars, like we said, Jim Shooter was the editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics at the time. And Mattel had just lost the rights to the DC characters to Kenner. Kenner was doing the Superpowers line, which was a very, very big seller. So Mattel, not having DC anymore, went to Marvel and said, we'd like to license out your characters to create action figures, and we would like you guys to create a tie-in series in the comics. And they did market research. They found that young boys liked the words secret and wars. So here you go. Go build a comic series around Secret Wars. Now, Jim Shooter did write it, and Mike Zeck, the legendary Mike Zeck, was the artist, except for a couple of issues. Bob Layton did a couple of issues also, and you can tell the difference. I don't have a problem with Bob Layton. I don't think it's his best work, and maybe it's just because I'm a bigger fan of Mike Zeck that I admire the Mike Zeck stuff more. But back in the mid 80s, were you more of a DC guy or a Marvel guy?
No, I was a Marvel zombie for sure. Those were the subscriptions I had been given, and when I did have some spare change, because that's all you needed was spare change to get a comic, I bought Marvel. And it wasn't until it was my freshman year of high school that an actual comic book shop opened up in my town, and the owner said, you got to try some of these DC. I went, oh, DC, yeah. But he forced me to read, he forced me to read Justice League, the Keith Giffen, J.M. DeMatteis series, which is so funny and so well done. Read some of that, and The Flash with Wally West, and Wally West is my Flash because that was who I read about. I went, wow, these are These are really good. I've always tried to put a finger on the difference between Marvel and DC because it's still there to this day. It's just a different feel to their universes. That Marvel's just feels more, I don't know, bombastic, more larger than life, more colorful in some ways. DC has a little bit more of the reality sounds weird in a universe with a guy who can run faster than the speed of light and Superman and stuff, but there's just a different feel, and they're both fine. But yeah, Marvel was my jam then, and I still buy more Marvel comics than I do DC to this day.
It was always like Marvel and Marvel's heroes were always they were a little bit of the outsider and they were a little bit hipper, I think, than DC. Because DC, it was always because Superman and Batman had been around for so long. I don't think it's as much now, but I think back then, especially when Marvel first came out, Batman and Superman seemed like the adults in the room, like
Yeah,
the stuffy. They were part of the establishment, and Marvel always seemed a little bit more anti-establishment.
right.
That's why Marvel came to more prominence in the late 60s, early 70s, because they got so popular on college campuses because that's what college kids were looking for. It took Batman. He had his revamp in the early 70s where Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams brought him back to his darker roots, but it was kind of isolated. People act like that switch happened and all of a sudden he became popular. Batman didn't become the juggernaut that he became until the 89 movie. And then up
Right.
until then, it was Superman. For me, it's weird because I grew up with Batman, Superman, the cartoons. I mean, there's not a time that I don't remember not liking superheroes. And also Spider-Man. They're the three big Mount Rushmore superheroes. I remember buying Marvel a lot in the early 80s from the local 7-Eleven. I too didn't really have a comic book store that was near me. So for me, it was just going to 7-Eleven and buying Marvel comics. I don't remember there being a lot of DC there. So I would buy Spider-Man. I bought a lot of Spider-Man. Spider-Man is one of my favorites. Spidey and
Yes.
Batman. It could talk to me on tomorrow and I could tell you it's Spider-Man. On Friday, I could tell you it's Batman is my favorite superhero. But I remember just there being a lot of Marvel available and not DC. But then you're bringing up Justice League. Going to the mall with my mom or with my mom and my grandmother, I would go into Walden Books, I'd go into B. Dalton, and there would be The Dark Knight Returns and Batman Year One because it was around 86, 87 when those came out and they started to infiltrate the bookstores and Watchmen also because
Hmm.
all of a sudden graphic novels, air quotes,
Yes.
had become the new hip thing. And I mean, those three were the huge graphic novels, and also Killing Joke. But late 80s DC with Justice League, with Batman, with the Byrne revamp of Superman, that's really when I became a little bit more of a DC fan because, as I said at the beginning of the episode, also that I started getting into Vertigo with Sandman and Hellblazer, Swamp Thing. But this version of the Marvel Universe in the early to mid 80s from the Secret Wars is my version of the Marvel Universe.
Yes. Oh yeah.
The black suited Spider Man, the Mike Zeck Captain America. I've always loved the Fantastic Four with She Hulk. I have nothing against the Thing. I love the Thing. I actually love him in this miniseries. But I, I would get those. Did you ever in the Sears catalog? You were able to get. You could get the Marvel comic book. They would send you the comics and an orange box that you could put
Yes.
together to put the comics in. I still have one of the boxes
No.
somewhere here in my basement. It had Wolverine, Spider-Man, and I think the Hulk on it. I have to go look. But I would get those for Christmas, and they would just give you a selection of comics.
Hmm. And then you just had those in the middle of a storyline,
Hmm.
and it wasn't as easy back then to go hunt down
Now,
the
and it
next
would give
one.
you a price guide with it too. So I would look back and see like, okay, if I wanted to find this, how much would this be? But those were the comics that were in there. It was these early to mid 80s Marvel with She-Hulk and the Fantastic Four, with Spider-Man in the black outfit. And these were the ones that I was seeing at my local 7-Eleven before I could go to a comic book store. So this was my Marvel. Now, when you said to me, you brought up Secret Wars as an episode you wanted to be on. you own some of the, or do you own all 12?
I've got all 12. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think I finished getting. I didn't have them when they first came out. I got them again when that comic book shop opened up, and the owner had a bunch of back issues in the basement because that's where all the cool things happen. And I bought them all at that time, and still remember, owning number 8 with the first appearance. Well, okay, the first appearance chronologically, getting Amazing Spider-Man 252 with the actual, in our time first appearance, that took a little bit longer, and I had to pay a little bit larger price. But to get them all and then really read it, because you kind of knew what happened, and I had a couple issues here and there. Like you say, you get these random packs of whatever. But to get that, it would have been like the late 80s before I had them all. And I still have them because, as my wife will attest, it's hard for me to get rid of things sometimes. But I have them, and it was so much fun as I read through them again for this, and we'll talk about it a little bit. I took note of all the advertisements in the comics too, because that brings you right back to your childhood too.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like I agree with you that that's my Marvel back then, because when we are teenagers and we're so heavily influenced, like we remember that nostalgia just sort of sticks with us. Just like we liked music from the 70s and 80s the most because that's what we grew up on. I don't listen to much new music except for stuff that the kids do in my classroom or that they want me to play at sporting events and stuff. But yeah, that's who we are, and our children and potentially our grandchildren will be the same way. Our parents were the same way. They hated our music. It's terrible music. It's, how can you listen to that kind of stuff? That's just how things work. But there is something just kind of awesome about the Marvel Universe then, because they'd been around for 20 years or so and had figured it out, like that shared continuity where DC always struggled. And I think that's one of the reasons that DC did Crisis was, oh my gosh, Marvel has overtaken us and we've got to do something about it. What's working for them, we've got to do the same thing. So they become more streamlined. Superman, Batman, Flash, Wonder Woman, all of them change and grow for the people. It's not just for kids anymore. You get in your 20s and people still want to read the comic books because that's what DC was aimed at, was the 8 to 12-year-olds. And then they're going to stop buying comics, so we'll just keep making stuff for 8 to 12-year-olds. Marvel was working for kids who had started reading when they were 10 years old, and now we're 30 years old. We're still reading Marvel comics because they were so invested in Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four and all those characters. They couldn't let them go, and some of them are still reading them today.
And that's why I think I loved the DC of the late 80s and into the early 90s after Crisis, is I think they marvelized themselves a little bit with streamlining their continuity. But I also think that they, as you said, they saw that Marvel had figured it out. They had unlocked how to do this. And they brought over, even in the early 80s, they brought over an influx of a lot of Marvel writers. Len Wein came back, Marv Wolfman famously created the new Teen
Mm-hmm.
Titans. So they were bringing in a lot of Marvel writers. And I think that's why the John Byrne, and not just John Byrne, but I say that's because that's the demarcation mark. The John Byrne Superman, that revamp of Superman is my favorite version of Superman, because they basically made him into a Marvel character in that they depowered him a little bit. They gave him a supporting cast that was on equal footing with him. They gave him subplots that were based in his civilian life, and it wasn't just Superman moving planets, and Superman being a little bit more depowered and being a little bit more relatable, had more relatable problems. And that was that triangle era of Superman was my favorite version of Superman. And I just think DC, I actually think DC, they were coming off the success of Watchmen, of Batman Year One, Dark Knight Returns. DC in the late 80s, up until maybe Zero Hour, were firing on all cylinders.
Yes.
JLI, as you brought up. And that's when I started kind of moving over to DC. But I was still with Spider-Man because the McFarlane Spider-Man, that's when I had my subscription to Spider-Man. And I was lucky.
Oh
I
yeah.
got my subscription just starting with the Michelini and McFarlane run. So I was right there from ground zero. So, I was into that whole fandom. I thought McFarlane was God back then and he could do no wrong. I was buying 3 issues of his Spider-Man #1. And then when Spawn came out, I mean, there's
Only
been
3 issues?
only 3 issues. But, then when Spawn came out, I thought it was the greatest thing ever. I was
Yeah.
young. It was the 90s.
Yeah.
What did I know?
Yeah, and it's you look back and I'll still say of all those guys who eventually went to Image, I enjoyed McFarlane's art as much as anybody's. I think Jim Lee got better as time went on,
Hmm.
but McFarlane's art, there's something about it that I really enjoyed. But when you look back on that decade as a whole, and there's a whole other podcast is the 90s, but you look at it now and you go, oh, what was I thinking? And I've reread some of those types of things and went, oh, it wasn't as good. Like to read McFarlane's Spider-Man is adjectiveless Spider-Man.
Yes.
Well, it'll only take you about 3 minutes to get through an issue anyway. There's not many words involved in it, but it's what it does is it shows you, again, as an English teacher, storytelling, the best artists tell the story and you don't need a ton of words. But the best combinations take you a while to get through because you want to appreciate the art, but you also like that story where it doesn't intrude too much, but it does enough. Like I kind of miss they don't have as many descriptive caption boxes anymore in comic books. They don't do as much of that, in part because the pictures tell that story. But I like to read the words and see that too. But that's where the 80s mixed. If you didn't spend at least 10 to 15 minutes reading a comic in the 80s, you skipped a few pages because it took that much to kind of look at everything and read everything. And I think that's part of what I really like too. And that has gone away a lot. And then sometimes it'll come back depending on what series you're reading. Probably not many of the superhero comics, but those I can get done in 5 to 10 minutes these days most of the time. So
Oh, we're busy people, so
that's
maybe
right.
Maybe that's good
Speed
for us.
reading. Yeah.
But rereading this, I don't have. I never had all 12. I never had all 12 of the miniseries. I did have, and I think it was a second or third printing. I did have issue 8 with the black costume because I love the Spider-Man black costume. I've always loved the black costume. I wish they did it justice in Spider-Man 3, but I still hold out hope. And I had the issue. Is it 11 or 12 with Doctor Doom getting? It almost looks like he's getting ready to fight with his armor all destroyed and tattered, and he's all bloody. I think
it might be 10.
Is it 10? Okay. So I
Yeah.
remember having those two at least, but for this reread, it's funny because talking to Tim, as I said earlier, I found that I went to go look for. I knew I had the collected edition with the Alec Ross cover, and I knew I had given it to my son to read. So I went into his room and was looking around his books and his comic books to find where he had it. And then I was on issue 10 or 11, and I have some comic books down here. And I looked at one and I said, wait a minute, is that another copy of the Secret Wars collection that I have? And it was a different side. It doesn't have the Alec Ross cover, but I said, oh, okay, so I have an extra one.
There you go.
Which I didn't even know. But yeah, so I read the collected edition. I do not have any of the original issues anymore. And I don't remember buying them. This is one of those miniseries that I don't think I was aware of when it was actually being released at the time. And I can't remember when I realized that Spider-Man had a black costume. It just was all of a sudden that, oh, hey, Spider-Man has a black costume.
I think my godparents got me a subscription to Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man.
I used to buy that religiously in the 80s.
Oh, yeah.
I loved Peter Parker.
And shortly before that, so I think I started that in the late 80s, number-wise. And then when the issue, like Spider-Man goes and disappears into the big structure, and the next issue, the Black Cat is searching all over for him because that's his girlfriend at the time. She can't find him. She runs into the Kingpin. She ends up with her bad luck powers that she still has till today. And then the very last page, all of a sudden this black-clad Spider-Man drops down from a tree branch. You always think in all of New York City, how in the world did you run into each other? But they do. I went, whoa, what in the world is happening here? And of course, in future issues, they always have little flashbacks, but without giving away too much because all those issues hadn't come out yet to find out. I was, wow, this was crazy stuff, and yeah, so rereading it brings back those feelings I had, and I should dig out the Peter Parker issues too to kind of solidify the how did you feel at that moment when you realize that Spider-Man looks, because who does that, right? Superman's costume with minor tweaks, had stayed the same for all those years and stuff like that, but Spider-Man, you're going to change Spider-Man's costume? Are you crazy? And of course, that was the first of many. Ultimately, Captain America took on a black costume, and Thor's costume changed, and all these people changed their costumes because, well, styles and trends change. But the classics always come back, right? Spider-Man's, original costume will always make a comeback, even when the black one's there. Captain America's costume is iconic. That's not going to change too much. The Flash is the Flash. You can't change that too much. So, the other thing about reading the original ones is reading with that newsprint paper. Mm-hmm. Oh boy, there's just something about that. And young people today maybe can't know what that means.
No, they don't know what it's like to get done reading a comic and you just see on your thumb, you see that, you see the remnants of the newsprint on your thumb.
Yeah.
From turning the pages.
It's awesome.
But to go back to that, and like we keep saying, I mean, this was the first of its kind. Mm-hmm. So nowadays, because of things like Secret Wars, because of events like Crisis on Infinite Earths, every year there are company-wide crossovers. Now it's expected, but this was something new. And Spider-Man changing his costume was big news back then. This, as you said also, now characters change their costumes. Different people become the characters. So you kind of get numb to it after a while. You're expecting, because you also know that it will go back to the status quo eventually.
Right.
With few things that don't. I mean, when Robin became Nightwing, I'm sure maybe some people thought, oh, he'll go back to being Robin. He's now been Nightwing almost as long as he was Robin, the character of Dick Grayson. So, and he's equally, if not more popular as Nightwing than he was as Robin. But for 1984 and 1985, Spider-Man showing up in a black costume was mind-blowing to 10, 11, 12-year-old kids like us seeing that on the... And I do like... I mean, they had to do it because of the way that they were releasing Secret Wars, but there was mystery to it. You didn't know why this was happening, and you had to... That was the brilliance of it. You had to go back and, if you read Secret Wars, you'll find out what's going on. Now, were you reading issue to issue while it was coming out, or was it after? Okay.
Yeah, it was after because, again, however old we were then, like 11, 12 years old, I didn't have a job. I got an allowance, which...
And you didn't have a comic book store near you.
Yeah, I didn't have, again, go to the grocery store. There's a bookstore downtown. And again, if I had enough.
People always bring up newsstands, but I don't think I've ever bought a comic off of a newsstand. Now, I've seen them when I was younger, when I would go to South Philly with my parents, that's where they grew up, and we would go there to get our hair cut or go visit my grandparents, and I would see newsstands that had Batman, but I never stopped to buy a comic book. And now, as I've gotten older and worked and lived in the city before I live where I am now, you see newsstands, but now you don't see comic book there anymore.
No.
But people always bring up newsstand, but you were at the mercy of newsstand distribution, meaning, as I'm sure, like I said, going to a local convenience store, I can remember going with my mom to the local shopping bag that we had in Southwest Philadelphia, and always looking to see if there were comics in the front, but it was always only Archie. It was never Spider-Man or Batman.
Yeah.
So I was always disappointed, like, oh, great, Archie again.
Yeah. Well, in the grocery store where my dad worked, so Mom would, sometimes she'd do the shopping, go with her, and I'd go to the magazine aisle while she did the shopping, and I'd sit there and read comics, which, you probably shouldn't do, buy it or whatever. It's not a library.
That was me at the bookstore.
Yeah. And so that's what I would do. And again, if I had some spare money and was in a place that had them, I'd pick up an issue. But I had comics I bought back then that I never got the next part of it for 20 or 30 years until I suddenly had more disposable income that I could. And the ability to track down a little bit easier the back issues.
Yeah.
Like I said, when the comic book shop opened, and he was a bookstore as well, but he got all the direct distribution of comics and stuff. That was so huge because he had all these back issues there, and you'd buy these. He had some coverless comics. I have some original Silver Surfers that have no covers on them, and I paid a dime for them. Are you kidding? Like I have the stories.
I have New Teen Titans #2 that I bought at Pat's Deli in Southwest Philadelphia, 5 minutes away from my house. So new coverless. I didn't realize until years later that that's the debut of Deathstroke.
Oh yeah.
So it's not worth anything because it has no cover on it. But
Sure.
still, I didn't realize in 1985 or 86 when I went there to go play Street Fighter because they had a Street Fighter video game in the back, and I would buy 10-cent candy, and he also sold coverless comics that I was buying an historic issue.
Yeah.
But again, it was just that I can still feel the newsprint on my fingers. It was just because I was like, oh, cool, like Robin's in this, and
Yeah.
there's this cool guy with like swords and an eye patch. I didn't know in 1985 that it was going to be that this character was going to be in 10 million TV shows and movies and video games.
Right. Yep. It's I got the first Black Cat appearance because that was my first subscription was Spider-Man at the time, and it's so torn apart. I think the cover's still holding on, but it's just like the reason that my dad's baseball cards would have been worth so much money because nobody took care of them. They put them in the spokes of their bicycles.
Yeah, nobody knew back then.
Yeah, you didn't know. That's why they're worth so much because nobody took care of them. And now, like your and my Spider-Man #1s with Todd McFarlane are worth nothing because there
Yeah, I
were a
was gonna
million
say,
of them.
Going back to the 90s when everybody thought that comics were going to be worth
Yeah.
something, so they bought 10 million copies and they're worth nothing because everybody had copies of them.
I've got some X-Force #1s if anybody's interested. So
I used to have a subscriction to X-Force actually
Okay.
in the late 80s. And it's funny because I was never a big X-Men guy. I was one of the few who wasn't I don't dislike the X-Men, but I was never as into them as other people were, and that was right in the middle of X-Men mania. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I liked Cyclops back then, and I thought the different colored uniforms were cool. So I got a subscription to X Force. Now, I started this with that quote from Marvel's direct sales manager, and I wanted to ask you because, like I said, you came to me and said, "Hey, I want to be on the show," and I said, "What do you want to talk about?" You said Secret Wars, and I was excited because I hadn't read it in a year or two. I mean, I'll go back to it every once in a while, but it's funny that was the perception of Secret Wars for a long time is it wasn't that good. It was just done to sell toys. I mean, spoiler alert, I like Secret Wars. Reading it again, I think it's a fun miniseries, especially compared to what these company crossovers would become. I think they'd become a little bit more cynical and, as you said, they saw with Secret Wars, hey, we can get people to buy all of these other issues because they want to find out what's going on. So then after this, Secret Wars 2 came out with the Beyonder and his disco outfit and his David Hasselhoff hairdo. And I tried to follow all that. I actually finally did buy the collected edition of Secret Wars 2 a couple years ago on Kindle and read it, and it was okay. Like it didn't stick with me like Secret Wars has for all these years. But yeah, sure, this was done because Mattel wanted a tie-in for their toys. That's fine. I mean, it's the comic book industry. Things are going to be done because of commerce. But you have Jim Shooter, who at the time had been doing it since he was 16 years old. He's the editor-in-chief of Marvel. He knows these characters. You have Mike Zeck, who at that time, and you can correct me, I think he was on his way to superstardom. He was still working on Captain America.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yes, he was.
And he had done the Punisher miniseries also. I
think that came after.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that came after. You can see the evolution of his art. Mm-hmm. It's a little tougher in Secret Wars because he has so many characters to draw.
Yeah,
when it's just Captain America.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's why Bob Layton took over for a couple issues. When it's just Captain America and you have like 4 characters in the whole issue, it's much easier to draw, with the style that he has. And so, yeah, Zeck is a personal favorite. I know he's kind of a little bit of a recluse these days down in the Philippines. You can't get commissions or anything from him. So good luck finding something else if you want artwork by Mike Zeck, or if you want to go to a Comic Con down in the Philippines, he'll meet you there, kind
Oh
of a
yeah.
thing. But yeah, you can see the change and how his style. And by the time he gets to the Punisher, it's a completely different style. It just, to me, that's always fascinating. You know, and the thing with Shooter, I think, and rest in peace, Jim Shooter, but I think, you know, they came with this, we want to sell the toys, and he wanted to be sneaky and make what he thought was going to be an impactful story. Not, I mean, it is fun. It's absolutely fun. You can just read it by itself and go, this is a fun story. But I think he just said, yeah, let's do something with this. Let's make it important enough that it's not just, listen, some kid walking down the aisle at Toys R Us or whatever sees the toys and goes, these look really cool. You know, Mom, can I have these toys? And then, oh, there's some comics that go along with it. Maybe I want to do that. Or the other way around, you know, I'm reading these comics and they have some new toys. I want a toy with the black costume of Spider-Man on it. Like, that would be really cool. So it worked both ways. But Shooter was also worried about what the Marvel Universe looked like, you know, and continuing to move that along. And I think because Contest of Champions wasn't well received the way they thought it would be, it didn't really have any big impact. Okay, we're gonna do it right this time, and that's why Shooter also, I think, penned this one. Like, I'm gonna do it right because the man had an ego, and he thought he could do it the best. He's notorious when you read stories from writers of the time where he would tell them, no, you should do it this way, instead of letting them have their own style. I think that's where he went, and that's what, to me, you know, when I suggested doing this, was it's a pretty impactful pop culture moment in time, because it's a crossover, but also a crossover between the toys and the comics and everything else. And again, the fact that 40 years later we're going, hey, this is still important, and it holds up. Like, you can read it now and say, wow, this is really kind of cool. I still enjoy this on a different level than I did back then. Then it was just shock and awe. Like, all these people are together, and what are the X-Men going to do? And what is Magneto going to do? And what is Doctor Doom going to do? Because you didn't know. And nothing was for sure in this world. You know, somebody might die, and you might think they might actually stay dead. That doesn't happen either in this one, but there's death and then resurrection, because, of course, there is. It's comics.
Yeah, and that's, I was going to bring that up also. For a comic that is aimed at 10 to 11-year-olds that's trying to sell action figures, there is mass casualties, carnage, someone getting shot through the chest,
Yes.
and there's also existential dread with Doctor Doom having
Sure.
the infinite power and afraid to fall asleep because he might wipe out a whole universe if he has the wrong dream. So, and that's what I mean by they could have just done anything and had it be 12 issues of the good guys fight the bad guys and rinse repeat for 11 issues after that. And I think that Jim Shooter, as you said, wanted it to have an actual effect on the Marvel Universe and on the comics. And it does. And it does it in that Marvel way. As you said earlier, Marvel was different than DC. And I think that's why the movies have been, other than Batman by himself, why they've been able to craft a combined universe and why they've been so successful is they've been able to transfer that type of feel of the comics to the movies, with it being one shared universe with all of these heroes together. And yeah, they might bicker, they can be funny, there can be life and death consequences, and that's what this miniseries captures. And as you said too, it's just maybe for me because I look at it and it brings me back to a certain time and place in my childhood that these are the heroes that are basically in Ember for me, because this is how I want them to be. This is how I want the Fantastic Four to be. This is how I want Captain America to be. This is how I want Spider-Man to be. But I do think that Shooter and Zach and all the creators who were doing this didn't just see it as a quick cash grab to try to sell toys. I think they were taking it seriously, and you see all the changes that came out of this miniseries with Spider-Man in the black costume, the She-Hulk joining the Fantastic Four, the Hulk starting. He had just gotten Dr. Banner's intelligence, so he was
Yes.
basically Smart Hulk, but he was starting to lose it. He was starting to lose it as the series wore on, and by the time he got back, he was back to being the lovable, stupid Hulk that we all
Right.
like.
And
Um,
really his series was approaching issue 300. So they had started that kind of regression with the Hulk, and all of a sudden he's the bestial Hulk again. They're shunting him off to another dimension in Hulk 300,
mhm.
and Secret Wars hasn't ended yet. But you're starting to really see, and they really address that in the later issues of Secret Wars. Yeah, and then again that, hey, maybe I should go check out his series. I wonder what's happening over there. At the end of a pretty legendary run by Bill Mantlo and Sal Buscema over there too. So just yeah, that kind of stuff was going on. One of the things I think this did too, I made a list of here's what's happening in the rest of the Marvel universe. And we'll talk about the X-Men and Magneto kind of working together. But this is the setup for a couple of years from then, that Professor X asks Magneto to come and help with the X-Men. So their arch enemy suddenly is in the mansion helping with the new mutants and everything. And it was kind of the stage was set there, like we can work with this guy under the right circumstances. So there's one of those repercussions. At the time, the Wasp is the leader of the Avengers, and
Yep.
I'll to this day say, outside of Captain America leading the Avengers, the Wasp is the best leader of that team. I've always loved her.
Really? Now,
I've
see,
always loved her as a leader.
I was never a big Avengers reader. I mean,
Okay.
obviously, I knew the Avengers. I knew of the different permutations of the Avengers. I only knew that she was the leader of the Avengers at one time because of the Secret Wars comics. So, what
Yeah.
made why do you have that opinion that she is?
She listen, she's a much more powerful character than people give her credit for, like for where she started in the 60s as the damsel in distress, with Ant-Man. And she became less of a ditz and would still kind of bring that personality out if she wanted to. But she stepped up when she was elected leader of the Avengers, which I think was in the issue 230s or something like that, kind of right before Secret Wars, or right around that time. And she was leader for quite a long time. And Captain America would defer to her. And again, you have some of that more equal rights, giving women credit for what they were capable of doing. And I loved her. And again, part of this is just what we've been talking about. I was reading Avengers in the 80s, and that's what I love. And that's Wasp was the leader. And so it sticks with me. And I just go, wow, there's like the Masters of Evil storyline that happens in Avengers, which is an iconic story. She's the leader. How does she lead them out of those kind of things? Those sort of things. She just is one of those under the radar characters. But you see here, like she's the leader, but everybody defers and says Captain America is going to be our leader, and that stands out. Cap's my very favorite character in of all superheroes, and I think partly because of that and reading his comic book at the time, you're just going, wow, this guy is incredible. But everybody just goes whatever Cap says. Even Wolverine, who at the time is kind of feral yet, like, well, what Cap says is probably okay. It takes him a little while to get there, but at this time, Iron Man is not Tony Stark.
Yep.
He's Jim Rhodes, and they make so again. If you're reading this and you hadn't read Iron Man for a while, you're going, wait a minute, who? What? Somebody else is Iron Man. Hawkeye had just gotten married. Sue Storm is pregnant, or Sue Richards, sorry, is pregnant in the Fantastic Four. All these things are happening, and even Thor, right in the middle of the Walt Simonson run. Are you kidding? That's the best
Yeah.
Thor run there is out there ever. And all these things come together. And if you hadn't read some of those, you kind of wanted to go see what was happening. So they were working it on you. But if you weren't familiar with these other characters or weren't familiar with them, they caught you up in a hurry. Like you kind of felt, but again, like the mystery, like you talked about, even in Secret Wars, there's a mystery. Well, wait, why is Jim Rhodes Iron Man? What is really going on with Thor and the Enchantress over in the Thor comic. Like, what is this? I want to go find out. And then you might be led that way, just like you'd be led from those titles you were reading over to Secret Wars to find out more of what's happening. So again, the planning is so good. It just when I really considered all that, I thought they had to have this wasn't just a whip it together in 1 month kind of a thing, because you had to lay the seeds down in the titles, and then plan out, hey, in 12 months, here's where we're going to be in Secret Wars. I need you to get the character there sooner than that, and then understand what's going to happen with the subplots along the way.
It's definitely not paint by the numbers, because I wanted to bring up a few of those character beats, especially one with the Wasp, who I don't have a lot of experience with. I have experience with her in the movies, and it's a totally different character. I almost, as I was rereading it, started to say to myself, "Ugh, the Wasp is an annoying character," but it turns, and like you're saying with that, she kind of had that ditzy type of personality, but I think a lot of it is it's kind of like a show that she puts on because she's so powerful. She wants people to misunderstand her. I like her
Yes.
relationship with the Lizard. I like how they built that in this series. The X-Men. Now, not I said earlier that I was never the biggest X-Men guy. I didn't become an X-Men fan until later, when I started buying the black and white Marvel omnibuses that they would put out,
Oh yeah.
and read from all new X-Men #1 in the mid 70s up until the mid 80s. So then I got more into the X-Men and saw what people saw in it, especially the John Byrne, Chris Claremont run.
Yes.
But
Yep.
the X-Men in this, again, this could just be, we have super teams, here's the superheroes, the X-Men can be separate because they're the X-Men, and villains. But no, you have Storm, who is the leader of the X-Men. You have Cyclops, who was on his honeymoon and is transported there, who used to be the leader of the X-Men. And you have Professor X, who now is out of his wheelchair and can can be more involved in not only battle planning, but the battles themselves. And you have Storm and Professor X butting heads, because Professor X automatically, and Cyclops even comments on it in one of the issues, saying becoming more he's becoming more like he was when the X-Men started, where he was a little bit more stern and overbearing. And he's going up against Storm, who, one, is the leader, and two, this was Mohawk Storm back in the 80s.
Yes.
So
Oh
this
yeah.
Storm is very proud, and she is not going to be taking orders from anyone, even if it is Professor X. And you have that wild card of Magneto, and this was the beginning of Magneto becoming almost like an anti-hero, where he goes from being just a paint by the numbers villain of, I want to take over the world. I mean, he always had the, I'm a mutant and I'm fighting because I'm persecuted, but I think he was more of a paint by the numbers villain before he kind of got this makeover in the 80s. And this is where you get that idea that they've ran with Professor X as MLK and Magneto as why am I forgetting the
Malcolm X.
as Malcolm X. Thank
Yeah.
you. I'm old.
Yeah. Still younger than me.
No, it's not the years, it's the mileage.
Yeah.
But I think that's where you start getting that idea that they've, of course, run with in the movies. And like we said, we brought up the Hulk, who was going through, he had Banner's intellect, but was slowly losing that. You had Volcana and Titana were created in this. Now, I am going to admit, I don't know, did they go on to have any kind of runs anywhere as villains, or were they quickly forgotten of after Secret Wars?
They pop up every now and then. I remember an issue of Amazing Spider-Man. I don't know why these numbers pop in my head. I want to say it's
Oh, I
283.
think I could see the cover. Is it
Yep,
Spider-Man has his back to us in the black costume, and it's the Absorbing Man and Titana running
Yeah.
toward him?
Yep.
I
Yeah.
remember that issue.
Yep. And so, yeah, Absorbing Man and Titania were together and maybe still are together for a long time in the comics, which you can see the flirtation in this and how they're, going to get together, have a relationship based on they both appreciate people with strength. And, you get a little insight into her as kind of a scrawny little kid who gets picked on a lot, and all of a sudden she has power. Volcana is similar to that. Like she only pops up when Molecule Man pops up because she's attracted to somebody she can mother and take care of.
I
It's
will
mythology at
say,
its best.
I
So
will say that has not aged well.
no.
The whole Enchantress calling her a sow and a cow,
Oh yes,
and
that's ooh.
the whole Owie and Owen Reese is the Molecule Man, and she is just they form a bond very quickly, and they're both the Molecule Man is talking. I mean, he conceivably is the most powerful supervillain in the Marvel universe because he can control molecules, but he's also a milk toast who is going through therapy that he likes to remind us about every. If I was Dr. Octopus, I would have wanted to crush his head with one of my mechanical arms also.
And that was kind of unusual back then. The idea of a character needing therapy. You know, people didn't
Yes,
recognize
yes,
that as
yep.
much back then. But you know, they've popped up. They were an important part of Secret Wars 2.
Hmm.
And even the Secret Wars that Jonathan Hickman wrote back in, I think it was 2015, all of a sudden he's important in there again because everything kind of links back to him because Doctor Doom's in there and he knows how powerful he is. So he'll pop up, but none of them have ever had any like super memorable stories that I'm aware of that you go, oh yeah, that was really important that they fill in the blank. Because Titania, well, there's a ton of strong people out there. That's really all she is. Volcana can fire, you know, heat blasts and stuff. Well, we got people who can do that too. And so there's nothing super special. It's more about who they are in a relationship with that makes for the stories. In fact, I wrote some Avengers fan fiction some years back, and I included like Absorbing Man and stuff in there because just cool, cool character, and I think I had Titania in there too, just because she's everywhere that the Absorbing Man is. So, yeah, you know, those are brand new characters because they happen to be in the suburb of Denver that the Beyonder brings to this battle world, and at first, when you first see them, you're going, well, wait a minute, where did Doctor Doom get these people from? Like, do they sort of randomly appear and then they, you know, explain everything a little bit later? But I suppose we should talk a little bit about the Beyonder himself and, you know, what a kind of unique character he became.
Say, I'm not gonna lie, I didn't know until I started after rereading the series. I was looking online and just wanted to read about Secret Wars. I didn't know that they then eventually explained that it was a cosmic cube. Now I don't know if that stayed because I have not read Jonathan Hickman's Secret Wars, so I don't know if
Yeah,
they've changed. And I know there have been other series and miniseries and one shots that have explored the Beyonder and his race and all that kind of stuff. I'm only going from Secret Wars 1 and Secret Wars 2. So he was at first this godlike being who can create and destroy universes. But I had read somewhere that it turned out that he was a cosmic cube that had gained consciousness. Now, I don't know if that's still what they're going with.
I'm trying to remember if it was that or if ended up becoming a cosmic cube, which is, I think happened. So there was a little bit. There was a story in Fantastic Four, and it was in the 300s. After Reed and Sue left for a while, they were going to go be parents and stuff, and so the Thing was in charge of the Fantastic Four, and they end up in a story called Secret Wars 3. End up out there, and I think as a result of that, they discovered a race called the Beyonders, which was somehow connected, and I'd have to read them again. But somehow I think he ended up becoming a cosmic cube along with another celestial entity of some kind. I mean to, and I plan to reread the Hickman Secret Wars before these new Avengers movies comes out. Both of them come out because I'm sure that's where they're drawing from. I don't think they're going back to 1984 Secret Wars for Avengers. Maybe some elements. I bet they'll have some nods in there for us old timers. But I bet they'll take more from the Hickman one, which again involves Doctor Doom looking for ultimate power, and the Molecule Man's part of that, and all of that. But yeah, we'll see what they do. But I just, the line that the Beyonder keeps using, and they reference back in about every issue, where he says, "I am from beyond. Slay your enemies, and all you desire shall be yours." And you're just going, slay your enemies. Well, the heroes aren't going to do that, right? I don't think the X-Men are going to do that. So how is this going to be
Maybe
resolved?
Wolverine.
Maybe Wolverine. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, at the time he had no issues doing that. So,
Yeah.
well, he still doesn't. But yeah, and what would you do? And ultimately, of course, at the end of the series, where different people gain their wishes, be careful what you wish for. It's the old gift of the magi trope, monkey's paw, all those kind of stories. Well, what would I wish for? Well, you wish for $1 million, but how are you going to get the $1 million? What has to happen for that to happen? So, yeah, the Beyonder is an interesting. When he came to Earth in Secret Wars 2 and became human, I think that took away from certainly from the mystery, but also,
It took away from the mystery when he visited Peter Parker's apartment and Spidey had to show him how to go to the bathroom.
yeah, yeah, that's true. Yeah, that I
Now,
forgot about
and
that.
you
But
just brought up, I mean, and we'll talk about it, but yes, the after Avengers Doomsday, the next Avengers movie is going to be Secret Wars, and I will admit, when they announced it, my first thought, I even said to my son, I said to him, I know they're not going to do it because I knew, and I think I'm going to try to read the 2015 miniseries also just to get myself ready. But I said to my son, I know they're not going to do it, but I wish it would just be the Secret Wars from 1984.
yes,
I just want to see
oh
all the heroes on Battle World fighting each other. They could even get David Hasselhoff to come and play the Beyonder in that
yes,
white suit
yeah,
as as a wink and a nod. That would be great. But
yeah,
yeah, I'm sure there'll be some kind of throwaway line or something that they'll do that will go back to the original. But I don't think it's going to be. I don't think it's going to be like the miniseries. I wish it was.
yeah,
That would be cool.
yeah.
And I will also say that's one thing, and I think that's why I haven't read the newer Secret Wars, is that I associate the multiverse with DC. I don't associate that. We've talked about it. That's why Marvel always to me felt special, is that it was all one universe. They were all, people joke about it, but they were all in New York. So that's how all the heroes were able to interact with one another. I always thought of the multiverse as a DC thing. So I mean, and I'm going to admit too, as you had said earlier, you don't listen to music now because you hit that certain point where this is the music I like, and I'm not going to listen to
Hmm.
new stuff. I just don't want to. I hit a point with comics where these were my comics, and I don't have the time now to read newer stuff. So I have not read a lot of new Marvel stuff. I know there's a lot of multiverse stuff in Marvel, and to me, it just seems like that was always a DC thing, which is going to be funny because now it's going to be associated with the Marvel movies. So that's
Right.
something else they've lapped DC with, is
Yeah.
is taking control of the multiverse angle, and everybody will think that Marvel was the first to do it, but that was really a DC thing.
Well, and in some ways, it's a lot of fun, the Spider Verse and all these variants of Spider Man and everything. But other ways, it's kind of like, and the whole thing leading up. We won't get into it. The whole thing leading up to the Hickman Secret Wars that he did in Avengers, with basically destroying all these universes because it's destroy or be destroyed, and what's going to happen. It just got, maybe again, if I sat down and reread it kind of thoroughly instead of month to month as I had done at the time, it would make more sense. But it got to be, Hickman plays the long game when he writes. He did it in Fantastic Four, which I really enjoyed his run there. But yeah, it's a lot. It's very heavy, and heroes having to make difficult choices, which is fine. But choices of billions of lives, oh, that doesn't feel very Marvel-y when they do
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah.
yeah, but
Yeah, and with this, going through and rereading this again, yeah, I mean, issue to issue, sure, it's a lot of good guys, bad guys fight. But I also think you brought up Cap is your favorite superhero. This is my ultimate version of Captain America. I love this
yes,
version. And it's the version that, yes, everybody defers to him, but they defer to him because of who he is, and you can tell that he is a soldier. But he also, one of the scenes that stands out to me is one of the later issues when the base where they have some of the bad guys held prisoner is starting to collapse, and he tells everybody to get out. He goes back in, and he's going to let the prisoners out, and Wolverine shows up and helps him, and they had been going at odds because Wolverine was somebody who was in the military also. You
right,
didn't know as much about Wolverine's background then that you do now, but Wolverine says, "I didn't expect to find you here," and Cap says, "I don't care who they are. Nobody deserves to die stuck in a cage," and
right.
And that end scene where I talked about there's mass carnage when Doctor Doom he steals the Beyonder's power, and just famously a bolt from the blue comes down and just destroys all of the heroes. And the beginning of the next issue, you just see Cap's shield broken, and it's supposed to be an unbreakable shield. It's something that they kind of used in Avengers Endgame.
Yes. Yep.
And
Yeah.
this just this is my ultimate, like, and I want to go back and read. I've read here and there some of the early 80s Cap run with Zek and with Roger Stern and with JMD Mateus. I want to get some of those collections because that just is in my Captain America wheelhouse, where again, with people who've grown up with the movies, and this is not old man shaking fist at cloud, because I was always more of a DC guy, but I just like that Captain America who goes out at night and patrols. He goes out
Yes.
and he's running around on rooftops in his red, white, and blue uniform, and he's patrolling New York and just looking for criminals. And that again speaks to Marvel, and he's not in Secret Wars, but you had heroes like Daredevil, like Spider-Man, who has been one of the complaints about these most recent Spider-Man movies is they want him to get back to being a street level superhero. Now, I will say it is brought up in Secret Wars, and that's also one of my favorite parts, is when Spider-Man goes up against the X-Men and also goes up against Titana. We've already brought her up. And I'm trying to think of which character. I can't remember. One character says to Spider-Man, like, I think it might be Johnny Storm, says, well, you're used to dealing with muggers. Why don't you need to leave this to the heavy hitters?
Right.
But Spider-Man says to the X-Men, like, you can't touch me. If I don't want you to touch me, you can't touch me. And then he does it to Titana also, who is the classic bully who thinks she's just going to use her strength to beat him into a pulp, and he uses his experience and his quickness and his cunning to get the best of her and frustrate her. And it also has the classic, and this is one thing that I think it's gotten better over the years in the movies, but Spidey as a comic character is just unique because, and this is one thing I've commented on, they've made everybody in the MCU into Spider-Man. Spider-Man was always unique for his humor, for using those quips to get his adversaries off balance by making fun of them. And it's funny because in the Sam Raimi movies, which were so slavish to those to Steve Ditko and Stan Lee and John Romita early issues of Spider-Man, they left out a lot of the wisecracks. And they finally
Yes.
got to them with Andrew Garfield and also with Tom Holland. I mean, I'll still say that the movies aren't that great, but I think Andrew Garfield was a really, really good Spider-Man. I like Tom Holland too.
Yeah. I'm still a Tobey Maguire guy. His Peter Parker is the best.
Yes, he
Like
does
that.
have the best Peter Parker.
Yeah. But you're right. Like suddenly Iron Man's throwing around wisecracks and stuff, and that's not something he did quite
There's
as much.
a whole
but-
generation who thinks Tony Stark is super important to the MCU and is hilarious. Reading Secret Wars, there's a great bit where Mr. Fantastic is fixing the Iron Man armor, and Rhodey says to him, were you surprised if there was a black man under this armor? And Reed says, I never really thought of it. But
Right.
Rhodey is going through it where he's only been Iron Man for a short time. And he is thinking, like, these people are used to, back then they didn't know that Tony Stark and Iron Man were. Everybody didn't know everybody else's secret identity, so they didn't know that it was Tony Stark. But most people knew that there was probably somebody different under that armor, and he's kind of going through a little bit of imposter syndrome because he doesn't know if he's worthy enough to be representing out there as Iron Man. I mean, I brought up the whole existential crisis. I love the way that the heroes are brought back, where Claw, who is, and we're doing spoilers,
Yes.
everybody who is listening to this has read this, but Claw, who has been kind of possessed by the spirit of the Beyonder, is basically talking Doctor Doom into bringing the heroes back. And there's a healer. Now, I was worried about saying your name when we started this. I think her name is it Zashi?
Zaji, something. Yeah,
Zaji.
something. That's how I pronounce
Which
it
I
in my
will
head.
say, that is one of my least favorite aspects of the book, is the whole Colossus pining for Zashi. And and Johnny Storm being his, his lecherous self as he usually
Yeah.
is.
Well, it seems weird. You get the Johnny Storm part, and then you
Hmm.
go, well, wait, Colossus, but he's in this relationship with Kitty Pryde back on Earth, although it was going through a little bit of a rocky period. But then you start to recognize that Zaji, or however she pronounces her name, it's part of her power that when she heals
Hmm.
you, you grow attracted to her. It's a Florence Nightingale syndrome to an extreme, I guess. And like, oh, now I kind of get it. But again, those when Johnny Storm kind of was like, yeah,
I have no time.
enough of you.
We're talking about words that we learned at reading comic books. I did learn the word chippy from from Marvel Comics. I love the
Hopefully, never used it. But
no, no, I never used it. I love early '80s comics because they're still kind of, we're talking about. I do like that scene with Reed saying to Rhodey that no, I never really thought about if there was a black man or not under that armor. But then
yeah,
you also have Rhodey talking like he's like shoot and stuff like
yeah,
that. It's
right.
like all right, like
Well, he's got a different dialect. If anybody who had fought with Iron Man at any point in time teamed up with him, certainly recognize just voice patterns and dialect that he's using is very different because
yeah,
just like you growing up around Philadelphia and me growing up in Minnesota, we didn't grow up speaking the same way. We have
mm,
different things. I've got the yeah sure you betcha over here of the Midwest, but you start to recognize those things. Wait, this isn't the same guy. Which maybe they thought it switched periodically anyway. Like,
sure,
who's to know? He's Tony Stark's bodyguard, and that
yep,
could be a job that changes. We don't know that. You brought up Claw too, and to me, Claw is one of those interesting characters as a villain,
yeah,
where it doesn't show up really often. And I had some random issue of Daredevil that he appeared in, which was weird, but Daredevil takes those weird turns sometimes, and I don't think Frank Miller was still writing it at the time, but he's a cool character, and I never had realized that he really started as like a Black Panther villain and Fantastic Four villain and stuff like that. But he's made out of sound,
yep,
and just the things that Doctor Doom does to him, and like he's a little bit crazy. Well, he dissects him into all these
yep.
pieces of sound to steal the Beyonder's powers.
Remember, this is a miniseries that's supposed to tie into a toy line, kids.
Yep. So hey, we're gonna make this Claw because Claw looks cool. He's
He
got
does. I like him
the
in this miniseries.
sound
I've
thing.
never. This is
Yeah.
the only time I've had any kind of exposure to the character other than the Black Panther movie, and it's a totally different character,
Yes.
obviously.
Yeah.
So this is the only real time I've ever had exposure to the comic characters in this miniseries.
Yeah. And he hasn't had a whole lot. I mean, again, he'd pop up every now and then, but you don't think of him as, oh, he's part of this really amazing, life changing storyline. He's just this guy who shows up because we need a villain sometimes, or we need a sound villain for whatever reason that might be. But cool powers, and then when like you said, when the Beyonder kind of infects him and helps him, basically makes Doom sabotage himself,
Yeah.
because that's how Doctor Doom gets beat over and over again all the time. He sabotages himself because I think ultimately he's afraid of what will happen when he gets what he wants.
Yeah.
That be careful what you wish for. Like, I want to take over the world. I want to beat Reed Richards. But he always does things so that it doesn't really happen. It's like, why doesn't the Joker just kill Batman? He could do it any number of ways. He really could. But then what? Like,
Yeah.
now what do you do if you're
And
the
he'd be
Joker?
bored.
Yeah. So, and you wouldn't be able to sell as many comics because. But
Now,
we're
we're bringing up the Doctor Doom of it, and I love him in this miniseries. But I do think, and I want to get your opinion on this, I'm surprised at the choice of villains that they brought over. Now, the superheroes I can see, and there are some that were missing, like Scarlet Witch, Doctor Strange isn't there, Daredevil, who I don't think was as popular then as he is now, so maybe that's why. But the villains, you have Doc Ock, who's a heavy hitter. You have
hmm
Doctor Doom. You have, to some extent, the Lizard. But then, I mean, the Wrecking Crew, were they ever that big of a... The Enchantress, I guess. But, I mean, you couldn't bring Loki. I mean, I would assume the Green Goblin was out of commission. You
Yeah,
couldn't,
he
you
was
couldn't bring the
dead.
Hobgoblin. I mean, Spider-Man has such a deep bench of bad guys. I guess you could just bring over all of Spidey's rogues gallery, but that wouldn't be fair. But the Red Skull, I mean, they bring Kang, but they kill him almost automatically. Now
Yeah.
he's brought back later, but he's taken off the board
Well,
almost
and Kang's one of
automatically.
the more powerful
Hmm.
villains there is in reality with time traveling ability, and even there you're bending the realms of really where did you get Kang from, and how did you get an enchantress from Asgard? You know,
Yeah.
but he's the Beyonder and he's got all this power. Yeah, you're right. There are certainly a lot of magical based other people you could have brought with. You could have brought the Abomination,
Yeah. The
against the
leader.
Hulk, the leader. Well, that would have been interesting too with the leader and Doctor Doom.
Hmm.
Both kind of these maniacal people who want to take over types of things. And I wonder if yeah, the Wrecking Crew is interesting, and I kind of like them as a group, but all these other ones have some uniqueness to them. Like you only have Doctor Doom as somebody who really is this emperor, like somebody who wants to take over things. But the Wrecking Crew all have the same basic powers. They're big and strong, and Zorby Man has his own unique powers. But the Wrecker has a magical crowbar and stuff like that. And you're just like, oh, okay. I wonder if it was
Or even
these.
Sandman, you know?
I love Sandman.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But I wonder if it was the toy company said, here's who we want to make toys out of. We think these guys look cool. Like Doc Ock, what a cool toy that would be. The Lizard would be a cool toy. All those kind of things. Like here's who we're going to make the toys out of. Put them in your story. And I don't know if that.
Yeah.
I guess I didn't research enough to see if that was the choices they made and why they made them.
Well,
But
famously, there was only about 2 or 3 waves of the toys made, and the toys were not successful at all.
no,
This miniseries has far outlived the toys. We keep compare the miniseries of Crisis, and I compare the Secret Wars toys to the Superpowers. I think Superpowers is looked more fondly upon than the Secret Wars toys, but the toys that Superpowers were connected to, or I'm sorry, the miniseries that Superpowers
yeah.
toys were connected to, even though you had Jack Kirby, I don't think is remembered as fondly as Secret Wars is.
No,
So
no. But I
there you
think the
go.
Superpowers toys, we grew up watching Super Friends cartoons and all those, and that's what stuck with you because those were the cartoons that were on with superheroes. They're, the Marvel cartoons from in the late 60s and early 70s weren't around anymore. You had occasional things where I watched Spider-Man on Electric Company when he
Yeah,
was on there, live action. Yay.
wouldn't talk, or the Nicholas Hammond
No,
Spider-Man.
no. Yeah, right. And but those, yeah. So that's a little bit of a, I don't know if it's a coincidence or irony or what, but that DC won in the toy realm, but Marvel, that like you say that comic series sticks with us so much just because it's. And again, it holds up. Crisis on Infinite Earths holds up for DC too. I reread that a couple of years ago. Fantastic. Great storytelling. George Perez art, hard to beat that too. And George Perez knows how to draw 50 characters in a panel and
Yeah.
make them all look good. Nobody else could ever do that. But that's also holds up 40 years later and does some good things. But yeah, the villains, I don't know if they were just setting up. We just want people to beat on each other. There aren't a lot of intricate plots. They're planning a heist somewhere or
Sure.
something to do this. We just want people to beat on each other, and here's how that's going to look. Take people who just like to beat on each other and don't think too much.
And one of the more popular villains who would be introduced because of Secret Wars wasn't around yet because Spider-Man famously gets his black costume in issue number 8, and the black costume becomes the alien symbiote that becomes Venom, which,
Yes.
I mean, is there any other villain over the last 40, 45, 50 years that is as popular? Had his own comic series. He's become an anti-hero. It all starts in Secret Wars. And I always like that
Yeah.
idea that he thought, of course, Spider-Man, because it's Peter Parker, thinks that he's going to the machine that's going to make him a new costume. But unfortunately, and he thinks that it's because the new Spider-Woman is also introduced in this. There's a lot of superhero stuff going on in Denver because you get Titana, Volcana, and
Yeah,
Spider-Woman was also in the suburb of Denver that got taken for Battle World, and she has a a very cool costume, and it looks like Spider-Man's black costume, and he even thinks, okay, well, maybe subconsciously I thought was thinking about her
right.
costume, and that's why it became even later when he sees the other heroes using a different machine, he
Yeah.
just passes it off as, oh well, I'm sure it's okay.
Right, right.
But I mean,
Well,
that had super long lasting, and that's when I was really, really buying Spider-Man comics. Was the whole alien costume saga with him getting rid of the costume, and then Black Cat made him the new black costume that he would wear, and so he would interchange the black with the blues and the reds, and then of course Venom came back. You know, the symbiote comes back and jumps onto Eddie Brock, and there you go. You have Venom, and you have the next 50 years of storytelling.
well, and you wonder how they certainly had some things planned that this wasn't going to be a long lasting, like the costume was alive and it was not necessarily a good thing. They certainly hadn't planned Venom and all that sort of stuff. That's way down the line. And even all that, like Spidey hopping back and forth from his red and blues to his blacks. He goes to black when it's a darker time for him. The death of Jean DeWolf, one of the great stories ever written by Peter David. He goes to black for that because he's mad at the world. Even some of the Brand New Day stuff that the new movie will be based off of goes back to black when Aunt May gets killed for the 15th time, and
She can't stay dead. Only Uncle Ben can stay dead.
yeah, yes, yeah. Bucky's back when Stacy's back. Yeah, only Uncle Ben stays dead. But yeah, so you see that, like, this is the darker Spider-Man. So now he's in the black, kind of like in Spider-Man 3 you referenced, where it impacts him. It impacts him mentally too. They switched out because it had become so popular. Decided to cancel Marvel Team Up and start the Web of Spider-Man series, and it starts with a bang with like him getting rid of that costume once and for all, or so he thinks. And ultimately that leads to the Eddie Brock, as we find out later, getting it because he's down below the church bell tower that rings and knocks it off, and it all comes back and it works. And when you go back and you reread these, knowing what ultimately happens with the black costume and becomes Venom and all these other things, oh wow, well, they hadn't planned that, no way. But it's the beauty of comics that you can retcon things. I mean, they've retconned. There was a series, I haven't read it, maybe I will, where Deadpool was in Secret Wars.
Oh God.
Or they go back and say, well, Deadpool was there too. Because, of course, Deadpool's so famous and popular that you got to somehow include him. And basically, somebody's wish was that nobody remembered that Deadpool was there afterwards because they thought he was annoying. They'll keep doing that. They had a limited series where they did a Spider-Man and Johnny Storm, an extra little adventure that happened when they were in the Secret Wars. Okay, well, it was interesting. It was, another battle scene type of a thing. All these spin-offs. There's even just recently Marvel had one called Battle World, where all these different things were gathered, but it was different time periods. So you have Bucky from the 1940s, and you have Spider-Man shortly after he became Spider-Man, and you have Hank Pym after he's kind of given up on life. You have all these different characters all brought together on a battle world. You're going, oh my gosh, is the Beyonder back? Well, no, it's Korvac, a famous Avengers villain who also has a lot of power. But again, they keep milking that, but knowing that there's a movie coming, now instead of selling toys, Marvel is selling their movies, because everything in the comics comes back to, if somebody goes to see a movie and then walks into a comic shop, we want them to buy this. Yeah. So the marketing thing hasn't changed. It's just changed who they're selling to and what it is they're trying to sell them.
Yeah, and we keep talking about the Secret Wars movie that's going to be coming out. There was also on the DC television shows from a couple of years ago, they did a whole thing on Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Yes.
So, as we said, these things have survived, and fans keep coming back to them. It's why I have two different versions of the collected edition, is because they are going to be in print in perpetuity. They will always be in print. And now with Avengers Secret Wars coming out, I'm sure more people will be going back, not just reading the Hickman stuff, but also going back to the 84 stuff
Right.
and reading that also.
Yeah.
So before we get out of here, I want to know, we brought up Crisis and we brought up Secret Wars, and I think they sometimes kind of go hand in hand. So what is your favorite from the two? Is it Secret Wars or is it Crisis on Infinite Earths?
Oh boy.
Haha.
Yeah, that's a hard one. That's like asking me to choose between my two children. Which one I,
I won't
I
tell.
think,
I won't tell the other one who you picked.
yeah,
So
right.
it's just between us.
I think I lean towards Secret Wars again because I didn't read DC at the time, and I didn't read DC for a number of years, and then to get to Crisis and understand that took a lot longer. Crisis is a better story and overall better artwork, but I like Secret Wars better. It's a little less thinking, but I just, again, we go back to what we talked about much earlier. This was our youth, and it's what was, because I wasn't reading DC at the time and didn't understand that. This sticks as the first really big thing for me. Like I said, reading advertisements and stuff in there, and a lot of them are for video games. Old things like Parker Brothers had a video hotline, and Masters of the Universe, which I love, He-Man and all that stuff. Movies like The Muppets Take Manhattan, the Last Starfighter, Buckaroo Banzai.
Is the Buckaroo Banzai ad, is it illustrated?
Yes.
I remember that ad. I
Yes.
think it's the Last Starfighter, him standing there looking up.
Yep.
Looking up at that. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can remember these from those comics. Yeah.
And the ones where every year in the comics they'd have a center spread of the Saturday morning cartoons that were coming.
Is this the one with Mr. T?
Oh, I can't remember if Mr. T was on there or not, but I remember watching that with the gymnasts and stuff like that.
Yes.
Just, all those things, even model cars. They had Spider-Man endorsed fishing poles of all things.
Oh my goodness. I don't remember that.
All that kind of stuff. Then they'd have little things like, hey, Marvel is launching Star Comics aimed at younger readers.
Yes, Peter Porker.
Yep. Oh,
And Heathcliff, and also Ewoks.
Yes. Yep. Only Peter Porker really stands up anymore today. But
I had a subscription to Peter Porker also.
Yep. I have his first appearance in, I love it, Marvel Tales, Tails. Yes. That one was also beaten up. I bet I read it 150 times.
Peter Porker did a version of Secret Wars.
Yes.
One of his issues. I think it was
the
Secret
bee yonder.
That's right.
So, yeah. So all those things, that's why I think that one will always stick. But they're both like right there, 1A and 1B, for the 80s and what they represent.
I think I would say the same thing. Now, I just read Secret Wars, so maybe it would edge it just a little bit, but I agree with what you said in that Crisis is a better story. And I mean, as much as I love Mike Zack, George Perez was working on another level during Crisis. Yeah. So I could then read Crisis tomorrow, and I would say that I would edge out Secret. They're both, I mean, you can't go wrong with either of them. I would love, as a DC fan, to see a big budget movie version of the DC universe the way I want to see it, culminating in a Crisis on Infinite Earths type of crossover. I know they did a 3-part cartoon series of it about a year and a half ago. I have heard bad things about it, so I have not watched it. And I'm surprised because DC, with all the different animated versions of their characters, could have gotten really creative. I know there was a part where they brought in, it's Kevin Conroy's last work as Batman.
Yes.
And they bring in Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill in the animation style of Batman the Animated Series. But with all of the history that DC has in animation, you would think that they would have brought in like Super Friends versions of the characters and the Superpowers team and the Beware the Batman and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But I don't think they did, and they changed the story. So I'm not going to lie, I haven't watched it, but from podcasts I listen to and trust, and from people I talk to and trust, I've heard nothing but bad things. But I would love to eventually see a Crisis on Infinite Earths adaptation for the big screen. And as we talked about with Secret Wars, I'll probably read the Hickman collected edition before, just to try to get myself up to date with it. Yes, I would love for it to just be a direct adaptation of the '84 series and just see them transported to Battle World and let them fight and let Spidey get his black costume and let it look like the actual black costume.
Right,
But
right.
Listen, Marvel over the last 15 years, it's not like they've had many, many missteps. Sure, it's a little bit different now with superhero fatigue than it was in 2008, 2012, but I would be lying if I said I wasn't excited to see what they do
Oh,
with Doomsday and with Secret
yes,
Wars and see if they can
yes.
actually successfully pull off a reboot like they've done and like DC has done with these big events in comics. Now they're just bringing it to the big screen. So,
Yep. And we're going to keep going because we love this stuff, and we'll never stop loving it.
no.
That's our pop culture love right there.
And like you said, I mean, this goes back, it brings us to a time when we were kids. And now seeing this stuff up on the big screen, this is stuff that we could only dream about 40 years ago. Oh, what if they did like a movie? I mean, especially somebody like Spider-Man. What if they did a Spider-Man movie? Oh my goodness. What if they did a Fantastic Four movie? What if they did an X-Men movie? What if Batman and Superman were ever in a movie together? And now we live in a time where Deadpool makes $1 billion.
Yeah.
And they
Yep.
have to reinsert him back into Secret Wars because he's so popular.
Well, I bet he'll show up in the Avengers Secret Wars movie. That's for sure. So
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how they balance that. So,
yeah.
I mean, I
But
guess that's why they pay Kevin Feige the big bucks. But until then, I was really happy to get you on the show because you've always been commenting on the episodes and stuff like that, which I love. But when I said to you like, what do you want to do, and you brought this up, I was like, oh, cool, because I get to reread it again,
yeah,
and
yeah,
then I
and
get to talk about it.
maybe some people listening haven't really read it or haven't read it in a long time, and they'll say, "Hey, this is maybe I should," and it's well worth it because it is well worth it. It's really a lot of fun, and whether you get the trade or have the originals, or even like I have a subscription to Marvel Unlimited, which is well worth the subscription price because for about $75 a year, I can read any Marvel comics I want. It's worth it there too to be able to read all the Secret Wars things that are out there as well. So
Yeah, and see, because of this, I messaged my friend Tim Rooney. Like I said, he has never read Secret Wars, so I'm going to send him my extra copy
there
of
you
the
go.
trade paperback. So
Yeah,
we're helping one person already.
that's right. Yes.
But Mark, it was a pleasure to have you on the show. Like
Oh,
I
my
said, you have
pleasure.
been
Yeah.
commenting since the podcast started, even before this podcast started, and I really appreciate that. And I want to say, if you want to put out there, we were talking before we went on the air about some of the podcasts you've been a guest on or that you listen to. So if you want to put out there to the people
Yeah.
listening,
Yeah, I don't have anything of my own that I do. I'm awfully busy as a teacher, and I'm the PA announcer at our high school, voice of the Panthers here in Richland, Minnesota, and I stay very busy doing those things. But one of my favorite podcasts that I listen to is the Captain America Comic Book Fans podcast, and every Wednesday they drop a new episode. It's, as I said, Cap is my favorite character. And I encountered this. They have the Facebook group, just Cap Comic Fans, Cap Comic Book Fans on Facebook. It is a bastion of positivity on the social media world, and I love it. Rick Verbanis started it up back during COVID and stuff, or shortly before COVID, and it's a great place. So I love listening to those guys. Every now and then I get to be a guest on there, either on an episode by myself or in groups. We even did a Cap fantasy draft for football, but we drafted Captain America characters and created a story. Oh, one of the most fun 2 hours of my life I've ever had, up until tonight, being able to talk about this stuff. So I recommend, if you like Cap, it's a great podcast to listen to. And they have over 250 episodes out now. You can go back and pick and choose. They interview different creators. They do some read-throughs of different issues, just all kinds of fun stuff. So I like that a lot. I've been trying to catch up. I discovered one called Marveling at Marvel's Marvels. And actually, the guys who do that one, I think, are also located in Pennsylvania. Since everybody there knows everybody else. but I'm nearing episode 100, and they have over 300 episodes. Where one of the guys on the show he's never read comics, he doesn't know any of the characters, and another guy's trying to like describe and explain these characters, and he basically calls BS on some of them. Like this doesn't make any sense, and it's if you can get past the large amount of swearing. I mean, they swear a lot on there.
Yeah,
It's not my favorite thing in the world, but
we're from Pennsylvania, you know.
yeah. If you can get past that, and they kind of find their groove, and it's interesting if you like Marvel Comics, it's to hear an outsider talk about Marvel Comics who doesn't really know it. It's kind of a different look at that. So that's something I listen to as well, and among the many other other things to listen to and read and all that. But those are a couple of my favorites that I listen to an awful lot.
Yeah, and like I said, I mean, Mark has been nice enough to comment on almost all the episodes of the show, and that's the way we kind of hooked up and started talking to each other, and then eventually got him on here. So I mean, I keep telling everybody, one, I want to thank everybody who does comment and who does share the show, and I mean, I really appreciate it because I just want to get it out there, and I want to meet new people and get to do stuff like this and get to talk about comics and movies and books and TV shows and all the pop culture that we love. So I will say to everybody out there, please, if you're listening to us on Apple, if you're listening to us on Spotify or on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast, please share the show. Let your friends know about the show. If you can, drop a review on Apple because it just helps to get it helps the algorithm, and it helps to get the show out there. And as for me, I'm also a bastion of positivity, as everybody knows. And you can find Pop Culture Basement. Just look for Pop Culture Basement on Facebook. Look for us on Twitter, because I don't call it the other thing that is not a bastion of positivity. I'm actually on Instagram and Threads now because I finally joined the 21st century. I'm hanging with the cool kids on Instagram and Threads, so you can look for Pop Culture Basement there. And yeah, please just drop me a line, give me a review of the episodes, tell me what you like, what you don't like, give me an idea of something you want to talk about, and Mark will tell you I have you on the show.
That's right. Yep. Excited. Glad to have been here, and a ton of fun. Anytime we get to talk about these cool things that we really enjoy, can't beat it.
Yeah, Mark and I were already talking before we hit record about some other comic series we can talk about. So I'm sure this will not be the last time that you venture down into the basement.
I hope not.
No, I will make sure I have popcorn ready for the next time you're down here. And I can't promise the lighting will be better because I like to live in the darkness. I'm like Spider-Man with the black costume.
There you go.
I like to envelop myself in darkness. But until then, Mark, I want to thank you again. Like I said, one, for just always being a supporter of the show, and two, for suggesting Secret Wars, because it was a blast to get to talk to you finally, and to reread one of the seminal comic events of my childhood.
Glad to be of help.
Great. And like I said to everybody else out there, I want to thank everybody for listening and sharing the show. Especially this season, I've seen that like the listening numbers have grown, and I'm excited by that. I'm just glad that more people are discovering the show, and I really want to get it out there. So until the next time, I will say, if you go into your office or you're just cleaning up down the basement, and you happen to find an extra copy of Marvel's Secret Wars, or maybe Crisis on Infinite Earths, or one of the other universe-shattering crossovers that spun off from these, give it a read. You might not get the newspaper print on your fingers like you did as a kid. The pages are a lot nicer and slicker nowadays, but it will bring you back to a time where you did fall in love with these characters, and I'm glad that I was able to experience that by reading this miniseries once again. But until then, again, I want to thank everybody. Mark, thank you again for being on, and I will talk to you all soon. Bye.
Secret Wars! I, Dr. Doom, will track Captain America in my Tower of Doom!
Spider-Man, Tower of Doom, and Dr. Doom versus Captain America studies so separately you put the tower together.
How shall I trap him, Secret Shield? With the Doom Slammer. So this is the Tower of Doom. Welcome, Captain. Get me out now, Spider-Man.
Tower of Doom from the Marvel Superhero Secret Wars collection. Dr. Doom versus Captain America set and Spider-Man figure each sold separately.
New from Mattel.